Now, I want to first give kind of a backstory about who you are, where you're from. Daryl is the Vice President of Data at Third Stage Consulting. She's originally from Rhode Island, the tiniest little state in the US. And now, where are you calling in from now, Daryl?
Right now, I'm in Jacksonville, Florida.
Okay, got it. So I know you go back and forth between Florida and New Hampshire, so you're living the beach life right now, I hope.
Yeah, I'm not a person for a tan. I am not a tanner, so I hide on the beach. But yes, I live in beaches.
That's awesome. I love it. And I know you've been in this industry for 30 or so years, and you started off as a system integrator for Great Plains, which I think is now Dynamics. And then you moved to SAP. So, I think through everything that you've done, you've kind of found that passion for, different things around data, whether it's integration, data privacy, data security, data readiness. So again, I'm excited to pick your brain. And I think it's important to know, everybody, that she is training for her next triathlon. And she just casually hikes the tallest peaks in New Hampshire. So we have an athlete on our hands as well as a cybersecurity expert. So anyways, welcome, Daryl. I'm excited that you're here.
Oh, well, I'm really glad to be here. Excellent.
Well, let's jump in. I have a few questions for you. And I want to start at the 50,000-foot view. As I mentioned, a lot has changed just with the pandemic, with people working remotely, just in consumer behavior. Literally everything, I feel, has pivoted a little bit. So tell me a little bit about how things are different now as it relates to cybersecurity.
Yeah, you mentioned a really good point, which I try to forget about, but we really can't, and that's the pandemic. And the pandemic really did change a lot of things in our lives. Obviously, in our work lives, it's changed our lives, I think, forever. But it's really had an impact on data and cybersecurity, and I think IT management and data management in general. And here's why. As everybody went home and stayed home and then gradually started working from home, that meant that once upon a time, when you went into the office, you were under this umbrella with an IT staff and things were plugged in and you were using a local network and everybody was kind of focused on the group of people that were in the buildings that were working there in a kind of closed environment. Well, that all changed virtually overnight to probably hundreds of millions of workers now across the globe working from home on their really distributed network of Wi-Fi and home equipment. And now the IT staff and the people that were securing the content and making sure that there were no bad actors getting into system. Well, now instead of looking at one or two or three locations, how many ever locations the company has, now they're responsible for kind of securing and creating an envelope around every single worker who is flung out using their kid's spare computer, the home network that kids are gaming on. They're going to coffee shops or any place that they can get a good Wi-Fi signal in their cars, anything. So everything went from pretty much a controlled environment for IT to a very distributed and immature control environment that people were now thrust into by virtue of having to work from home. So that left, as you can imagine, a lot more vulnerabilities, because instead of a company having, a vulnerability of the work office and maybe the occasional work from home and people traveling and some people tunneling in, to 100% everybody is gone from that closed environment. So now that left just more opportunities to break in, right? You got more areas to test. And I think the second thing that happened is that companies were suffering. They're trying to struggle with layoffs and cutbacks. They're cutting back on whatever they can. So there's less focus on IT, or even maybe more pressure because you're asking them to do everything from helping them log in with this equipment, the laptop that just got sent to them so that they could work from home on the network. So IT is doing way more than security, and their job just got probably 5-10 times more difficult. So you have less, so now you have less people able to do the work that needs to be done because they're asked to do more things than they were doing before, in addition to security. And I think the third thing that's happened is that criminal enterprises have seen this as a new way to make money. Hey, if we can't move those container ships that are sitting out there on the dock because of COVID, because the workers are all homesick, then maybe we should beef up and put more assets into cyber attacks and ransomware so we can make some money. So I think that really those three things were kind of a perfect storm for cyber issues rising during the pandemic, and that rise that we continue to see. So that's made a big game changer in that. So maybe we can talk a little bit more about some specifics about that if you're interested in any part of that.
Yeah, I mean, it's just crazy to see how quickly things can change. I mean, obviously, the pandemic was a huge world event that doesn't happen every day, right? And things are bound to adjust with that. And we've seen it firsthand. I mean, we saw what happened with SolarWinds. We saw what happened with the Colonial Pipeline. So I want to kind of break down these big breaches that we saw recently. Let's start with SolarWinds. How about what happened? Why was it such a big deal?
SolarWinds, I think, really rocked the IT and security world. And here's why. SolarWinds is software that's used to do upgrades in corporate environments. So if you've ever worked for a big company or really anything, they have updates that they make to their environments, and they use the SolarWinds to basically go out and deploy these patches and push the updates out to corporate users. Well, what happened is that software, as it was being developed, a lot of people don't really understand, how did it get in there, right? How did that bug get in there? Well, that bug got in there because they tested the software, and then before they moved it to be released in production, a hacker got in to the company, to SolarWinds, and inserted a Trojan horse in there, a piece of remote activated code or time sensitive code that would then get deployed along with all those wonderful updates that they're normally paying to get. So right in with all of the rest of the stuff that you'd expect SolarWinds to be doing for you, that you pay them to do for you, is using that software. There was a piece of bad code, a code that would go and activate later after it got pushed in with all the good stuff into all these companies' systems. And that software got activated to go and create an extra user that would allow kind of like a backdoor entry in all of these companies for the hackers to come on in and do their thing. And that got by everybody. So that was a hack of software that's meant to protect companies from this type of thing. So all of those updates that we would push out for Windows and whatnot, and all the security updates and anything else a corporation could do, along with that came the bad stuff. So that is what I would call a definite hack, but it really rocked the world because it was so at the core of a company that we trusted. It wasn't like an individual company being attacked. It was so brilliant of the hackers to come in and use that vector of a trusted piece of software that's constantly, they open the gates and say, come on in, bring that new update in here. They open it up for that, and they stuck the Trojan horse right on that sweeping trend as it comes in. And that's what was so scary about that. People just weren't expecting the threat to come from that trusted source. And I isn't that amazing? I just think
that's just mind-blowing.
Very clever, very, very clever. And it got by a lot. And we'll talk a little bit later, don't let me forget, about what could companies have done to prevent that from happening, because there are ways to do that.
Yeah, that was my next question too, was
Yeah.
how to prevent something like that happening if it's so sly and stealth for these hackers to just come put a little horse in. So
Yeah.
what about the Colonial Pipeline? I know that was a little bit different with ransomware, so maybe you could talk about that one.
Yes, not a hack per se. Well, ransomware comes in with a hack. It's not a breach, I should say. So let's talk a little bit about breaches versus hacking. So a breach can occur, it can be two different things, right? A breach can be when somebody just leaves data or a system exposed. In the true sense of what a breach is, like if we look at Europe, who is far ahead of us in our data security prevention and the way that they manage handling and protecting their own data and client data. A breach is any time that there's an opening, and whether or not anything bad happens, the breach refers to an opening. So think about a breach like if a sandbar is breached or something. It's just open. It doesn't mean that anything bad happened or anything escaped or anything was stolen. In the purest sense of it, it means that there was a potential exposure, whether or not something happened or whether or not we even know that something happened. Look, in Europe, you have to even say, when somebody left a sensitive document out and they know that it was left out in public in a place that had sensitive information, that's considered a data breach under GDPR law. And also would be if somebody left a company and the passwords weren't changed for X number of days or hours after that employee left, that's also considered a breach, whether or not somebody came in and did that. So when we talk about breaches, I think Americans think about somebody came in and stole something and that's a breach. But in the truest sense of the word, the fact that you left the door open in any way, shape, or form is the breach. All right, so the Colonial Pipeline was not a breach in a, well, I shouldn't say that. It wasn't a breach where people necessarily came in and took data out, right? But it was a ransomware attack. I'm not sure how they got into the system. I haven't read the recent diagnosis or after the fact kind of play-by-play on what exactly happened there. But they were able to get can usually be a small amount of code in there that goes in, and in the event of a ransomware, they actually just take your data and encrypt it. They encrypt it. So that means that any piece of data that you have available in the system is now locked down, and they hold the key. Now they hold that key so they can unencrypt the data, or they can steal the data and then unencrypt it with the key, in which case that's called a ransomware with a data exfiltration, where they're actually able to do that. So when we talk about ransomware, you've got this big ransomware problem, but you've got two problems in your ransomware, right? You've got, oh my gosh, did they locked us out of our system, our own data, we can't use it, and they stole it as well, or we think they stole it, we don't know if they stole it. I don't know if there was a problem with exfiltration on the pipeline one, but we do know that they locked down all their data such that they couldn't process the oil transmissions. They couldn't make their systems run at all because all of their data was not in the form that it needs to be in order to make their systems work. So they had to shut everything down. That means that as we saw at the pumps with the high spike in gases and some gas lines in some locations and shortages, they really just couldn't get that oil to move through because there are so many systems, there are so many sensors involved in moving that oil from point A to point B and making sure that it's safe and they can monitor it and log in. All that was blocked for them. And in the end, it was a very high ransom. I think it was $5 million, and they had to pay that ransom. It turns out that they did pay that ransom. Now, I have heard that the FBI was able to track down where the money went. It's usually in cryptocurrency. So you're forced to go buy Bitcoin or buy some other digital currency and then pay the bad actors, as we say, the ransomware guys, and you have to pay them money in order to get the key back, so that then you can use the key to unlock your data, right? So they had to pay that money. They went and paid and went in Bitcoin, and it went off into cyberspace, into someone else's what they thought was untraceable place, but I think the FBI was able to find the money and retrieve the money and bring it back. But most small companies will never see their money back. And here's the other problem: if they do ransomware and they're successful at it, and you don't have proper backups to get your system back up and running, not only data backups, but application backups, and then various, step-by-step backups going back in time to the point before you were infected, you really can't get your system back up and running without paying them. And believe me, there's no guarantee that you'll be able to get your system up and running. Even if they give you the key, they might, or they may never even give you the key, right? What if you just pay them the money and they don't even give you the key, or they give you the wrong key, or when you go to use the key, you just can't get it back up and running, and now you've lost business, and you've lost your ability to put together the orders that you had, or maybe you've lost other critical things that you can never retrieve because you just didn't have that system for switching over while you were under attack to a new system or a standby system or a redundant system, and it's very disconcerting. So being able to be prepared for ransomware and having plans in place that are step by step. This is where our backups are. This is what we're going to do in the event of an emergency. Just like we prepare for hurricanes, businesses need to start preparing for ransomware emergencies and other cyber emergencies, because it's just a matter of time before there's a weakness discovered and a company is now under attack.
Wow, that is just mind-blowing. And the fact that, you have no other choice as far as the Colonial Pipeline goes, they had no other choice other than to pay it, and to pay $5 million to get, like you said, the key back, and that being your only option. Nobody wants to be backed up into a corner like that. So I know there's a lot of companies that are talking about cyber insurance, and that's kind of their safety net. It's their comfort zone. And they say, we're okay. We don't really need to have this extensive cybersecurity strategy because we have insurance. If something happens, then it happens. But in this scenario, if you get a ransomware attack and you're backed into a corner like they were for the Colonial Pipeline, you might potentially be out of business, worst case scenario. So do you think that that is a sound strategy, is being reliant on cyber insurance, or should people reconsider?
Cyber insurance is a really rapidly maturing product market, right? So a year ago, I'd say, maybe you'll do okay. You'll pay the extra money, get that cyber insurance rider, and run your risks. But I think that the word coming back now is that the insurance companies are really becoming so much more sophisticated in defending themselves against having to pay out claims. So if you can imagine that if you were an insurance company, you'd be looking at everything right now, because there's such acceleration in the market that they're going to hang on every little clause, every little bit of wording. So what was true a year ago for feeling some level of comfort because you have insurance, I wouldn't be considering that to be a comfort place today. So let's think about this. I think this is one of the trends that's coming, and we're going to be seeing a lot more of in the cyber insurance world. Think about it: if there was a storm coming, in other words, they had predicted that there were going to be severe storms, or there was a hurricane coming, and then you decided that you were going to go open up your roof and do construction at that time, and you didn't secure your roof, and you didn't close your windows, and you didn't take any measure at all to secure your house, and you knew there was a storm coming. To claim after the fact that everything inside your house was damaged, your walls, your furniture, and all of that, while you simply just said, well, I've got insurance, and didn't do a single thing when you knew that there were things you could do to prevent a problem, that is kind of what we're going to be facing now in the next year with cyber insurance. They're going to be saying, listen, Mr. CEO, CIO, or whatever, what did you do? What steps did you take to prevent bad actors from coming into your company and putting ransomware in place? What did you do to prevent a data breach and exfiltration of data? Show us your systems that you're using, your policies and your procedures, the expertise that you have on staff or contracted with in order to put a plan in place and then execute against that plan. What's your plan and what were you doing to develop that plan and then build out that plan? And that's what we call having a defensible position. So if you have a situation and you're attacked, and then you go and you say, well, this is what we did. They're going to say, well, what measures did you have in place? Not right away, but after, right? They'll say, what measures did you have in place? And if you say, well, nothing really, we have, McAfee on each of our personal computers. Well, there will be questions raised about your policies. So what you're going to start to see now is a demand for a more organized approach for American businesses to have on protecting themselves from data security breaches, attacks, and ransomware. You may even see some requests for protection from the government or some language or work with insurance companies, that if companies are more advanced in their protections and the procedures that they have, maybe they get a lower rate, or maybe there'll be some absolution for insurance companies that the government can give them for when companies don't do anything to protect themselves. And what would they cover anyway? Reading that small fine print associated with that and what's in there is really important, because things are changing and they're starting to put in this language into every policy now, new policy that they write, that is ambiguous and really gives them a lot of wiggle room. So in short, I really don't think that you should be just relying on your cyber insurance to be the only thing that protects you from financial harm. The ruin that can take place within an organization, the loss of business, the disruption, the reputational damage when you lose people's information, or they can't place their order, or you lose their stuff. I mean, yes, it's happening to a lot of businesses, but if you're the one that's trying to place the order and your order gets lost and you needed it for something, you're going to be pretty angry, and you're going to say, well, why didn't you protect yourself from this kind of thing, Mr. Business, that I just spent $2,000 on my couch for? That's your problem. That's not my problem. So in addition to just losing money if you have to pay out for the ransomware or have to, restore, and maybe even a little bit of loss of business, I don't think that's even going to come close to covering what the damage will be if you are subject to one of these attacks.
Right. That makes sense. And I mean, insurance companies are they're hard, right? Just in general with everything. So I imagine it's the same thing with this, and that fine print can throw you for a loop. Even if they do pay out, you have that other trade-off, like you said, of you could lose your whole business. So get your cybersecurity strategies, guys, if you're listening.
Yeah. Take a look at those
Now,
policies.
I know.
Yeah.
Take a look at the policies and figure out what you're doing for yourself, because they could also, like you said, if you're not putting your own best foot forward, it doesn't help your case. If you don't have any cybersecurity strategy built in and you're not taking the initiative to protect your company, then the insurance company could look at that and say, well, you could kind of ask for it. So interesting stuff. Now I'm curious on just how it's happening. It seems like there's so many points of vulnerability, especially today. Whether it's small companies, large companies. Can you tell me, you talked about it a little bit with SolarWinds of how they got into the update, and it sounds like that was a very unique scenario that doesn't happen every day. What are the more common points of vulnerability that you're seeing just across various industries?
Yeah, I mean, obviously phishing is still the most prolific way that you see people trying to get in. I don't know about you, but several times a day, I'm getting even more and more clever phone messages and texts. So there's intrusions trying to happen on your phone. And let me tell you, if you've got two-factor authentication on your phone, which everybody should have on every app that they possibly can, they're enabling that two-factor authentication. But this is the two-factor authentication device right here, isn't it? So can you imagine if they hack your phone? Now they've got access possibly to your two-factor authentication device. That is really a target for them in more sophisticated attacks. So let's take a little step up here and let's go into, we started with talking about what are the trends associated with the pandemic and why is it worse, but let's talk about some of the technical trends now that are in play here. You know, who's behind this? This latest bump that we're seeing, particularly with the Colonial Pipeline, with I think U.S. healthcare was attacked last year. We're seeing the meatpacking plant, food industries. We're seeing, they probably don't advertise it too much, but grid attacks, electricity grid attacks. Those are primarily coming from nation states. So our frenemies, I don't know what we want to call them here to be kind of more politically correct, but there are probably a top list of 4 countries that are actively engaged in nation-state sponsored and funded cyber attacks. And they do this as, in my opinion, as a form of disruptive warfare. It is a bloodless war for the most part, I guess, but it is not without harm, and it is meant to penetrate and spread havoc and economic damage in our country. And that is a new form of warfare. I think we all need to face up to the fact that this is the new war. At least one facet of the new war. And in my opinion, it is not bloodless. If you've got a hospital system and they are ransomware now and they are taken down and they are unable to access patient records and somebody comes in and has an emergency event and they can't get into their computers, they may or may not have the history of the last treatment and may not know sensitivities, allergies. So to think that it is without harm for physical life, I think is wrong. I mean, even if a grid goes down and there's power out, there are collisions and crashes and things, and people that have devices that keep them alive that now are compromised. So it's definitely not completely bloodless or deathless in its attack. It can cause physical harm. So that's a really big, that's a really big problem when you think about it. That millions, hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars are being spent by other countries to attack infrastructure, food supplies, electricity supplies, medical care in our country. I mean, that's just the real reality of it. So let's take a step down from that, apart from nation state hacking and ransomware. Let's look at organized crime. This is a very lucrative market for organized crime, as was with prostitution and drug running and human trafficking. Organized crime plays a very large and increasingly growing part in the cyber threats that we see today. And I think we all can kind of think about, well, if it's not like we take a drug dealer and say, okay, you're going to stop doing that. We're sending you to college. You're going to go learn how systems, and we'll put you in a new role. It's not really how that works, but one way or another, either those groups or new groups that form that are organized criminals that are not necessarily connected directly to a country. They may live there or live in different places. Very hard to tell where these attacks are coming from because they can use masking devices to hop and have a series of really big hops across where they are to trace and cover all trails of where they might have come from. But one interesting trend that has alarmed me is the development of mercenary groups. So mercenary hackers, We all know what mercenary soldiers are, right? There are soldiers who are ex-military who say that for a certain amount of money, we'll go in and fight for you on behalf of your whatever you want, right? Whatever war you have. There now are developing pools of mercenary cyber soldiers who will work for your mission. And so it's not necessary per se for organized crime or even nation states to do all this work and develop all this talent in-house. They can simply procure these band of criminals to work for a particular target against a company or a particular set of infrastructure. And when you think about the top talent, trained to do this with, highly paid funding against, a company that's just trying to balance their budgets and make money, and IT and cybersecurity are just one line item. And here you've got this whole other, group with infrastructure that's there aiming for you if they pick you, or they just happen to catch you in their net. They're pretty sophisticated and using some pretty good products as well. So let's talk a little bit about what those have a loss for words. You don't see that much with Paresa there. Loss for words. Let's talk a little bit about the tools, right? Once upon a time, it was a guy in somebody's basement and mom's basement, and he dropped out of school or whatever, and that's kind of the image that we had probably 5 years ago. And let's go to it today. That we are now in this amazing array of different teams, armies really building and organizing around the globe, trying to make a money or do damage as part of some sort of a government campaign. And they're using some really sophisticated tools. So let's start with artificial intelligence. Now artificial intelligence has been deployed as part of hacking. So the ability to detect these coming in is getting more and more difficult because the AI learns the behavior of the corporation. It can learn. It is being used to analyze large amounts of data to determine weakness, to pull together the list of all of the employees off of LinkedIn with their email addresses, finding their names and addresses and personal information about them in order to concoct a more personalized approach to getting at what they're really trying to get at, which could be access to the system for getting money, or it could be invading their email system to send emails asking for money to be sent. I know that several companies, Third Stage included, has been a victim of that. And we'll talk a little bit about that and what we can do about that in just a minute. But I also want to point out one more disturbing trend with regard to equipment and infrastructure, and that's the use of quantum computers. So computers, especially if it's a well-funded organized crime or a nation state, they're actually deploying quantum computers, which are these massive things that like the Pentagon has, and they use to process their data. When you think about Watson and IBM, that's really on the verge of quantum computing. So now, as technologies become less expensive, as organized crime and nation states have developed and put funds together for increasing this infrastructure, they're now able to either develop a supercomputer or to link multiple computers together to make a quantum computer. And what's the problem there? Well, faster hacking, faster assimilation of information, faster moving threats, faster than human beings can respond. But worse, the ability to crack our basic encryption programs like AES 128 and eventually AES 256. So the foundation of how we protect data is now at risk due to this new level of sophistication and funding from the ability to use supercomputers and quantum computing as a way to get access to companies' data and our personal data as well.
Wow. I don't know if this is freaking anybody else out.
It's not a pretty picture, and I'm so sorry to say that, but maybe we can spend the rest of the time talking about some of the positive things. So what do we do, right? What are we going to do?
Yeah.
All right. So first, let me say that I think the U.S. is finally waking up. We just don't have the same level of threat happening as to the same degree in the EU. I work a lot in the UK. I work a lot with companies that are protecting their data under GDPR. And what has evolved there is really kind of the government came in and said, you will make sure that you secure and keep private certain data, sensitive data associated with your customers and your employees and anybody that you deal with. So I am sure that that's a really good effort to put in place here in the U.S. And I think we're starting to hear rumblings now about the government going to do things. But let me tell you what they're going to do. They're going to make lip service about going out and trying to find the criminals, right? Good luck with that, okay? Because they're buried deep in the hinterlands and it's very difficult to prove. You can't exactly blame a nation for something. It's kind of difficult. It's kind of like terrorist bombings, right? You know that they might be funded by the government, but it's really kind of hard to say where this came from. So they're going to make lip service about that. But what they're really going to do is they're going to pass laws that say that companies have to do A, B, and C in order to protect their data and secure the privacy of the customer's data. And you're going to see penalties eventually levied and fines for not doing that, because it's really up to the individual companies to start developing their own internal data privacy and data security programs to keep their own company and their data safe. It is not the government's job. We can't lock the border down. We're all in global business together. We just can't do that. So the only way, I think that honestly Europe thought through this, is that the only way to protect this is to make it the responsibility of the data controller. And the controller is usually the company that has the customer data and has the employee data. And actually, to make anything they do with that data the responsibility of the company that controls it, with penalties. And that's what we're looking at. We're looking at that legislation percolating up and coming into play as a response to what you see today. So what's that mean for companies? That's a lot. So let's talk now about very specific companies. What do we think this means? What do you do today? Because we're all talking today. You're like, yeah, Daryl, there's legislation coming. I'll wait until I see that. Maybe not such a good idea. We talked about the cyber insurance being a problem. So let's talk about, who we are at Third Stage here. We're helping companies to understand their digital transformation strategy plans at such a level that they're kind of thinking through, what do we need to do as part of this? What are the vendors we need to do? What are the pieces that we need to have here and should be exploring? That's what we do really well at Third Stage. So I'm very encouraged that at least the people listening here are part of a digital transformation and are going to hear this message and take it to heart. Listen, the same work that you're going to do for your digital transformation and your ERP implementations and your integrations of all your data, that's the same basic foundational work that you do for a good data privacy and cybersecurity strategy. It's about the tools that we add and protect and how we protect with tools. But you don't know what to protect if you don't know what you have. And if you're going through this process of a digital transformation, and especially if you're talking with us, please reach out and say, hey, how can we weave in The foundational work associated with a good data privacy and cybersecurity strategy, a data security strategy to what we're doing, so we don't have to go through and reduplicate all this work again once this legislation starts to come in, or once the insurance company sends the letter and says, hey, you got to do A, B, and C. Now, if you're already past that point, and you've already moved past your digital transformation and completed it, you have to rip open the engine again, look at everything again, and probably have to make some changes. Changes that would be much easier to plan for now and do now as part of your digital transformation. You're going to save a whole lot of money and keep your company a lot more secure and be better positioned for the future if you just take the time during your digital transformation strategy and your ERP implementation, or any integration IT projects that you're doing. You should be thinking data privacy and cybersecurity. What does that mean to us? Every single thing. In fact, I want everybody here today to go out to their change control process. I hope they have one. We're talking about not organizational change management, but software change control, system change control, whenever you change something in your system. And to just go out and look at all your forms today and add a column that says data considerations, right? Is this data private? Is it sensitive? And is there any impact on anything that would be considered sensitive data? So that's one thing that they can do today, is to start looking at that and then start weaving that into the plans. I think the next thing that people need to be doing is looking at who's making the decisions within our company for what security we have. So now let's get back down to, like we talked at the beginning, like stratifying small, medium, and large companies. It's kind of different for different tiers. So if you're a small business, what should you be thinking and doing right now? You should be thinking, I need to educate myself. I need to educate myself about what data security is. Take a course, reach out, start signing up for some learning that's out there. Go visit websites, talk to people. You should also consider engaging an MSP that provides some security services as well. So certainly McAfee, that's a good place to start, but you may want to, depending on the size of your small business, if you've got multiple locations, you might want to engage with a firm. So start first with a firm that's helping you maybe with your laptop support. But there's another level of firm called an MSSP. So an MSP is the guy that helps you with the laptop that you call up, right? And then you have an MSSP, which is a managed security services provider. So managed services would be laptop support, software updates, SolarWinds updates. A managed security services provider would be a layer or a different level of that, which would look specifically at how you're being protected. So if you're a large or small business, you should be looking at maybe on the cusp of that. For me, and certainly phishing education and all of that, and workshops. If you're not sure, just drop us a line and we're happy to send you some information about that. And we probably should talk about putting together some little weekly things that we can put out the door for you as well. The next thing, if you're a medium-sized business, that's where you have more to lose. You've got more endpoints, you've got more things to secure. In that case, thinking about poor Joe, the IT guy who's been going crazy through the pandemic anyway, he's probably not the guy that's going to move forward with you and do everything you need to protect yourself in this scary changing world that we have now. So in that case, I'd recommend that you look at an MSSP to help, and that you also are engaging perhaps a fractional or virtual CISO.
It really is mind-boggling how much things are changing and how quickly it's evolving. And one thing I'm going to ask Daryl here when she comes back, but is the trajectory of how much cyber threats are growing and expanding, is it matched by our cybersecurity efforts, or are we just kind of a little bit lackadaisical in adopting these different strategies that Daryl's talking about right now. So let's go ahead and here, take a brief second. I'll give her some time to come back and see if she can get her internet working. I know hotel internet can be so reliable, right? And she is on the road, so that is probably what's happening behind there. One thing I know Eric and I have been chatting about on our podcast is putting out workshops like Daryl was talking about, and also sending, almost like practice phishing emails to your team so that they get good at recognizing.
So yes, I was talking about mid-sized companies. So what can they do? They need to be using that managed security services provider in addition to Joe and IT. Okay, that's a program that's usually a run or a platform that you're running and engaged with a partner that's helping to oversee and keep up, that helps you keep up with the latest and greatest. And if you're just getting into it, I'd go with that virtual CISO, Chief Information Security Officer, or fractional CISO, that's going to allow you to be able to put a plan that's right size for you. So you're not doing something too big, too small, that you know what you're getting and that they understand what your plans are for your business. They'll be participating maybe in giving you advice on your digital strategy, transformation and inputs. We often provide that service kind of as we're going along with companies for third stage that are in that process, just starting to touch the surface of what should you be doing associated with this. For large companies, well, hopefully you have your own internal team. In that case, I wouldn't say you're on your own, but you certainly need to be constantly reinvesting and exploring what it is that you're doing. And especially now is the time to prepare and make sure that you have a good policy for data privacy and for cybersecurity. Remember when we talked at the beginning, you're really vulnerable for insurance companies not paying out. And the disparity, why I can see this coming is because, oh my gosh, the difference between a European company and an American company is startling in their awareness of their risk and their need to get with the program and even what to do. So hopefully this was helpful. Give some people some actionable advice. Don't go it alone. Take it seriously. Start planning now. And if you're gonna touch anything related to IT, it should be now every single thing starting tomorrow should be, do we need to be concerned about data security with this change? Is there anything we can do about data security while we're in here doing this change? And if you're doing a digital transformation, let's weave all that in now for the planning stages so you're not wasting money and having to do this effort, 3 months from now, 6 months from now, a year from now, when all of a sudden it becomes apparent that you have to do something.
Wow. That's so interesting. And one thing I wanted to ask you, just because I'm curious on your perspective on it, but as I always talk about how quickly technology is evolving. I mean, you go 1 week and it's like a new technology's out, things are different. It's advancing so quickly. And given the changes in the just how the world is operating today, with all these changes and how quickly things are evolving, do you think that companies are keeping up with their cybersecurity efforts to match the changes and match the increase in cyber threats? Or is it almost lackadaisical, trickling behind the rate of these threats?
It's abysmal. It's like when the virus came that nobody could believe the coronavirus was here and they weren't changing any behavior at all. And there's some political aspects to that, so I'm not going to go into it for that. But you can imagine that we've got a real threat, and we have to change the way we're doing things. Period. Right? We have to change something, and if we don't, then eventually the risk, grows. And it becomes a statistical fact that you'll succumb in some way to either ransomware or some other form of a hacking event. And let's not rule out that cybersecurity and data breaches a lot of times come from the inside. They come from employees that are stealing customer lists. that employees that are looking up information about celebrity customers or their neighbors or whatever. That's also a data breach. And that's also going to be the kind of thing that's going to be covered under, I'm sure, the forthcoming legislation. Like, you can't just let people have access to any data in the system. You have to have a reason under GDPR law for people to have access to sensitive data. There must be a legitimate business reason. We just don't even have that concept here in the United States. We really don't. And we missed the boat because we didn't take that opportunity with all of the momentum when GDPR was going in to upgrade our systems the way the Europeans did. So what seemed like a market disadvantage at that point is now going to become a market disadvantage for the United States as we try to catch up. So we're going to have to do it. And unfortunately, it means in a lot of cases for medium-sized with companies with legacy systems, a lot of systems that really have disparate systems and copies of data everywhere, they're going to have to clean all that up. It's going to be very expensive. So the time now, again, if you're thinking about digital transformation, ERP, now's the time. We're not just going to connect what you have. You're going to take this time and look, what do we have? And make this logical. If you're going to invest money, invest it and move the stuff once instead of moving and documenting it 2 times in probably in 12 months as you start to realize that this is the next phase that's coming.
Great. Wow. Very valuable. Thank you so much, Daryl. It's always a pleasure. My mind is always blown every time I have a conversation with you. So thank you for sharing.
Thank you so much.